The Smurg by Jessiy, read by Ella Max Mabella. Chapter 20. Epilogue. 65 years later, September 1st, 1991. With a hand on her hip, Hermione looked around the large open space of the Wizarding Museum she had created. It had taken her 65 years to finalize her dream of keeping wizarding artifacts safe and available for the entire wizarding world to enjoy, but she did it. The original concept had come to her the first time she had stepped into the Slytherin vault after arriving in this time. Seeing all of these priceless artifacts rot in the darkness of Gringotts had felt like a waste, and all she could imagine was the thought that the Muggle world would have these things inside of a museum where anyone could come and look. She realized it would be much more difficult because the things she wanted to showcase were highly coveted heirlooms that had not been seen in living memory. The first thing she did was reach out to the magical community and search for retired Aurors, those with meritorious service, and offered them more galleons than they could turn down. Not one of them said no, each and every one of them excited by the conservatorship she wanted to create. News of her project began to reach her peers, and one by one they came to her, offering their own heirlooms for a rational loan. And her search didn't end there. An entire wing was dedicated to the Hogwarts founders. Arcturus and Melania Black had been first, offering up anything that she thought might be interesting to the public, opening their home to her per usual. Hermione had gone to Albania and spent months searching for the diadem. In the end she found it, right where the Grey Lady said it would be, in the hollow of a tree. Hepzibah Smith was a much harder nut to crack. She had no intention of letting the cup out of her sight, but after much negotiation and a new ironclad contract, Smith allowed the cup to be on loan to the museum for 1 year with an option to extend at the end of it. Knowing that she wasn't anywhere near to opening, Hermione had asked that another clause be added. In the case of Hepzibah's death before the opening, the next owner would be obligated to follow through with the terms. And so it was. The only house she did not have a true artifact for was Gryffindor, but she had a replica made from her memories. The craftsman who made the replica was fantastic. She wasn't sure how he did it, but the steel even had a bit of green shine to it when the sun hit it in such a way, reminding her of the basilisk venom it had imbued her in her second year. She would bet that the actual sword didn't look like that this time, but that would just be her little secret. The most difficult part of the museum, other than security, was deciding whether or not to add Deathly Hallows. In the end, she decided that at least for opening weekend they should be included, despite Albus and Gellert both warning her not to. The hunt for them was worldwide, almost like the Holy Grail, and the temptation of one place housing them all would be too much, according to them. Charles Potter had easily agreed to the loan of his invisibility cloak, especially since James was such good friends with Rista, Hermione, and Gellert's first daughter. Surprisingly, Morphin had reached out the year after Marvolo died from complications of the tunnel collapse. Even though Albus had cocooned them with a magical barrier, something had gone wrong with his heart, killing him 5 days later in St. Mungo's. Morphin became a respected member of the community by identifying and breaking curses off of an ancient family artifact, which was super handy in her endeavor because he was one of the most trusted allies when it came to the museum. He had given her the ring the moment she brought it up, saying that he had no good memories of it and that the museum could have it. That was generous, of course, but Hermione convinced him the ring would be far safer being in hands of a family and that the loan would have a clear time of borrowing. Albus and Gellert were not wrong when they said it would be a temptation to any who sought the supposed power of being master of all three. The wand had been brought out of hiding as well as the Normangard blueprints. Even if the prison was never built, it was a thing of beauty, a magical architectural feat. All of this brought her to this day. The day her dreams would be realized, and she was terrified. It was like another child to her, a lifelong ambition had finally found fruit. With a wave of her wand, she dimmed the lights and walked out, nodding at the security auras that surrounded the place, wards shimmering as she passed. At 86 years old, she still felt as young as she had in her 50s, with the odd creak and protest of muscles and bones. The weather had turned lovely, green leaves only starting to give way to the rushes fall colors, and she decided that she would walk up to the castle instead of fleeing to Albus' office. It wasn't an unusual occurrence that a witch or wizard not on Hogwarts teaching staff be invited to the welcoming feast in the Great Hall, but for Hermione, Albus made an exception. This year, more than any year before, meant something much greater to her. Filch met her at the gate and walked with her up to the castle, bemoaning the lack of thumbscrew use in the more difficult of rule breakers. namely the Weasley twins. She listened to the outraged account of their antiques and hid a smile, glad that it was dark since tears were welling in her eyes. The great hall was filled with students, more than she had ever seen before. The tables had been elongated to accommodate the influx. No one seemed to mind Hermione as she walked up a row and joined the Hogwarts staff at the head table. She had just settled into her seat between Tom and Flitwick when the side door opened. The first years walked into the hall, following Deputy McGonagall like a row of ducklings into the water for the first time. They looked around in awe of sights, smiling at everything and everyone. They had a sense of wonder, even those who hailed from medical families. It was a thing of beauty. Hermione's sharp eyes focused immediately on the boys who were once the most important aspects of her life, Ron Weasley and Harry Potter. Hermione noted, with quite a bit of satisfaction, that Harry's forehead remained unblemished, unmarked, and unscarred. He was as normal as anyone else, and not in the least famous. She set her hand over her heart, desperately trying not to tear up as her heart clenched as her gaze moved to the two next people dear to her heart. Hermione Granger, the child, was deep in discussion with Draco Malfoy. Platinum blonde was as close to curly brown as they could get. Hermione's lip quivered, and a handkerchief was thrust in front of her face. "Are you okay, Aunt Hermione?" Tom Dumbledore said as he sat just left to her. He had taken up the defense post many years prior and became one of the best in his field. Hermione nodded her head, unable to speak, watching as each child was sorted. Faces she had so dearly loved for her entire life, and they didn't even know it. People that had died, and people she had sacrificed everything for. The most incredible revelation was the night she found out that she had been born in this timeline exactly as she had before. September 19th, 1979. That night, Merope had come over, and the two of them got so drunk they spent days sleeping off their hangover. It was a celebration, and it was a funeral. Happy that she would continue on and hopefully live a better life, but heart-achingly sad for what this other Hermione would miss out on. Not every aspect of being the famous Harry Potter's friend was bad. "Valak's gone," McGonagall called. Hermione smiled and watched Morphin's grandson sit on the stool. He was a mousy, timid little thing, but sweet as pie when talking about magical creatures, which was what he wanted to do every time she had seen him. Hermione just knew that Hagrid was going to absolutely love him in class. "Ravenclaw!" Hermione's brow rose to her hair. Surprised was an understatement, but she clapped just the same, proud of the boy. His family had done a lot in the way of fixing their reputation. "Hermione Granger," McGonagall called, and Hermione snapped her attention to the chair, wondering what might become of her this time around. "Better be Gryffindor!" the head yelled. Hermione cut her eyes over to see Albus, whose eyes were suspiciously twinkling. Tom snorted next to her. "Figured." "Oh?" she said. "For a descendant of Slytherin, you have always been Gryffindorish. This just proves my point." "I'll have you know that I was always a Gryffindor, even the first time around," Hermione said with her nose in the air, and she gave a disdainful sniff. "And you know very well the name was adopted." "Draco Malfoy," McGonagall called. Draco stepped up to the hat confidently, but kept looking over at his new friend. It wasn't hard to tell that he thought they would be in separate houses. The hat barely slid over his ears when the hat yelled, "Slytherin!" Hermione looked amused and clapped. As intimately as she had known him from her own time, she knew there was truly only one house for him. But the encouraging thing was that this time around, the house rivalries were more fun and games than the terrible division of fate it once was. His ears turned red as he made his way to the Slytherin table, smiling as his new housemates clapped him on the shoulder. "Miles Ollivander," McGonagall called. Hermione smiled and rolled her eyes, watching as one of his great-grandchildren swaggered up to the stool. He was the most like Gellert out of all their descendants, not just in looks, but also in personality. It was uncanny. "Gryffindor!" "Harry Potter," McGonagall called. The hat was on his head for exactly 3 seconds before it called, "Gryffindor!" Time was a funny thing, or maybe it was fate, because so many things she knew and loved from her own childhood were the same, and yet so much was different. Harry still had his parents. The Malfoys, though powerful, were more tolerant of bloodlines, though they still tried to keep their own line mostly pure. But the most telling thing of all were the hundreds of faces she had never seen before. Thousands over the course of her life had been born that wouldn't have without her interference.
"Ronald Weasley,"
McGonagall called. Awkward, Ron in his slightly used robes sat on the small stool, nervously, as the hat was placed on his head. And to Hermione's surprise, he took the longest to sort out of the whole lot. But just as all the others were sorted, so was he. "Gryffindor!" the hat yelled. He had looked relieved and sheepish as he made his way to his new housemates, already on his way to being best friends with Harry. But it was clear from the grimace on both the young Hermione and Ron's face that they were not yet friends. Hermione wondered if they would become friends at all without all the adversity that had pulled them together the first time. But as the young girl glanced across house tables, her gaze met and held Draco's. Friendship from the very first. Harry pulled her attention back to the table, saying something that made her laugh. Hermione rather thought that Harry would always be Harry, no matter when, where, or how. She dabbed at her eyes and nose with Tom's handkerchief, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulder, pulling her in for a hug. "Don't cry, Auntie. They aren't dead." "No, they are not." "So everything you did, everything you changed, it mattered. You did the unthinkable, and you get to have such an amazing nephew like me in your life." Hermione sniggered behind her hands. "Always modest, aren't you?" "I can't help it, if I'm wonderful." "You weren't the first time around," she eyed him significantly. He rolled his eyes. "Well, obviously, I just needed you in my life." He leaned in with a lady killer smile and a wink. "If you ever want to ditch Uncle Gellert, you know where I will be." Hermione sniggered again and smacked his arm. "Your mother would appreciate it if you used your charm in gaining a wife. She told me just yesterday how she longed for grandchildren." He backed away and shuddered. "My mother is a lunatic. She has grandchildren, 5 of them, including 7 great-grandchildren, and 1 great-great-grandchild. She's being too greedy. Rice may have been her second-born, but he was more than happy to marry and settle right out of school. Plus, I don't think I'm cut out for one woman. My brother has contributed more than enough." Albus, who sat on Tom's other side, leaned in. "Don't let your mother hear that. She will have you married faster than you can say woolen socks." "You say that—" Tom grumbled, feeling completely ganged up on, and focused his attention on his food, pushing around the bits of beans, round and round the gravy. Albus met Hermione's eyes and winked, ridiculously chuffed. Once they were merely headmaster and student, then became allies, to enemies, to friends, to family. Other than Tom, Albus was her greatest change. Hermione flew home tired after the long day, emotionally and physically wrung out, only to freeze in horror. "What do you think?" Gellert asked. A great grin transformed his face, standing in front of her with arms wide. Hermione's jaw dropped, and she studied the man standing in front of her. His long white hair was pulled together in a queue at the back of his neck like usual. The rest of him, however, was not usual. Gellert was sporting a long white beard, tied with several silver bubbles that gathered and hung in his beard, tinkling with each movement. His robes were the most violent purple, sporting neon yellow stars embroidered over the entirety. The worst part was that burnt orange crushed velvet of a hat, twice as tall and pointy as she had ever seen. The effect was hideous, but so familiar in a nostalgic way. The last time she had seen this look, she was a student at Hogwarts. Hermione narrowed her eyes, pursed her lips, and put her hands on her hips. "Gellert Grindelwald, have you been sneaking a peek inside my pensieve?" His happy smile faltered, and he opened his eyes wide, shaking his head as innocently as possible. "She didn't buy it, not for 1 second. "Well," he said, "I just wanted to see what I looked like in your time." "So you decided to copy Albus' look from when he was my headmaster?" "It was Albus," he muttered himself. "Makes more sense. Never did like the look of yellow on me. Makes my skin look sallow." "I don't think the yellow is your only problem." "True. Never like wearing hats. The purple, though," he said, smile creeping back in. "I could do purple." Hermione sighed and turned away, a little smile of her own on her face. "I'm sure that your dressing up like Albus had absolutely nothing to do with your youthful romance." "I can't say I have any idea what you're talking about," he said with a smirk. "I was curious, is all." "You knew in my time you were locked away in Nomengard. The only reason you would have to look and see about anyone was Albus. You know, I'm fine and not jealous, right?" "Nothing came of it. It was something once, but after I met you, those feelings paled in comparison to what I felt for you." "But he was your first love, and there is always something special about a first love." Hermione sighed, thinking of her own feelings she had had for Victor Crumb. He may not have been the first person she had a crush on, but he was the first boy to elicit in-depth feelings. There would always be a tender spot in her heart for him, no matter how much she loved Gellert, and she knew the same would hold true with him and Albus. They were innocent memories that should be cherished.
"Oh, love, wait! Something came by Al for you."
He grabbed the small letter off the side table and handed it over with a flourish, a mischievous little smile dancing around the corners.
"Bollocks,"
she murmured, flipping the letter over with thin, narrow slits for eyes.
"This looks glorious on you, you know."
"What look?"
"Unrepentant grudge,"
Hermione snorted. "He did try to marry me by force."
"And the poor bloke has tried many times to apologize since."
"You wouldn't think this was so funny if he wasn't still in Azkaban."
"That is a bald-faced lie. The hilarity would absolutely extend past his death. Watch, love, how much you want to bet he comes back as a ghost just for you," he snickered.
She pointed at him and looked as if she would rip him a new one before closing her eyes and taking a deep breath. Once she was calmer, she tossed the unopened letter into the fire. She hadn't read a single letter past the first 3, all those years ago, and like hell would she restart now. Forgiveness may be a thing of beauty, but she just couldn't do it for Prince. She was able to let go of her grudges long enough to forgive even Tom Riddle, the worst offender of horrors in her life. But Prince was an ogre. Even if he hadn't assaulted an aura as he was taken away that day in the tunnels and spent a significantly shorter sentence in Azkaban, things would have still turned out this way. But with no friends, no money, and no social standing, he had no recourse but to stay looked away and made an example of.
"Why is it that you can love Tom like your own and still not be able to forgive Prince?"
Gellert asked as he fiddled with the cuff of his Oxford, having ditched all the rest of the horrid clothing over the back of the chair. Hermione sat on the settee next to him and leaned in, enjoying as his arms wrapped around her shoulders and pulled her in, dropping a tender kiss to her hair. "Probably because I nearly said yes to him once. Because at the time I could envision a life with him. I turned him down because I had feelings for you. Had you not been in the picture?" She trailed off and shuddered. Likely, if she would have married him, she would have been in for a rude awakening. Gellert grinned his cocky, arrogant smile.
"I knew you wouldn't say no to me.
Not after you had a taste of my lips." Really, I seem to remember things differently."
"I have no idea what you're talking about,"
Gellert said stubbornly, eyes twinkling merrily. "Just like Albus." Hermione shook her head. Those two spent entirely too much time together. Even if they both denied it vehemently, they were as close friends as was Merope and Hermione. The flue flared suddenly, and the vision of Johanna, their daughter, floated amongst the logs. "Mum!" "What is it, dear?" Hermione asked, getting off the couch and sinking slowly onto the carpet in front of the fireplace. "Violet had the baby." "And?" "A little girl, Elizabeth Felicity Shacklebolt. They waited so long for her, and they never thought they would have another after Rowan, since he is nearly 13. A beautiful baby girl. Is that there?"
"Right here, Princess."
"She has your eyes, or she will. She's the sweetest thing. Gets most of her colouring from her father, but we anticipated that, being a Shacklebolt and all. But her eyes, Millen, she is so precious. My youngest granddaughter, and probably the last that any of my children will give me. But, oh, I have so longed for her. Violet told me to tell you that she will invite you over to the Grange Saturday night. With all the kids at Hogwarts, it will be quieter, and you and Dad will have plenty of time to catch up and see the baby."
"Tell Violet we will be there," Gellert said, smiling. "I have a gift for the baby."
Johanna snorted. "I bet you do. They'll be looking forward to it. I'm going to go back in and stay with Violet for a while. Love you." "Love you too, sweetie," Hermione said as Johanna vanished from the fireplace.
"How many great-grandchildren does that make now?"
Gellert asked, pulling Hermione to her feet. 10. Lucky number 10.
"Dear Merlin,"
he grumbled, wondering exactly how 2 children turned into 5 grandchildren and 10 great-grandchildren.
"Even Merope and Albus have only 7 great-grandchildren.
I guess we got lucky."
"Yeah, we did,"
he grumbled, pretending not to be as chuffed as he was. Hermione bit back a smile. Even if he pretended that he didn't know how many great-grandchildren he had, he knew each and every one of them by name. Also, he was the one on the floor giving pony rides to any child who wanted one at all the family gatherings. He is, as he always was, the life of the party. "Just think," Hermione said, "without a life I lived through before I travelled in time, I would have never come back, and we would have never met."
"Never did finish building Normangard,"
Gellert said as he stroked his beard, minus the silver dangling, he thinks. "What would you even do with it if you did?"
"I've always meant it to have a significant portion of the building dedicated to research."
"Yes," Hermione deadpanned. "Can't imagine anything would go wrong having a research facility attached to a working prison."
Gellert snorted. I only wanted to keep Albus in there. Besides, he would have loved to stick his nose in research." "Is that how you planned on keeping him locked up there? No high-powered wards, no beefy gone rogue, but research?" He laughed. "None of those things would hold Albus. Come on, woman. The only thing worth exploring as a means to keep him there was the research." Hermione shook her head. Even after 65 years of marriage, she was still surprised by this man. And as she looked at him, studying the laugh lines etched into his face, she realized that out of all the lives she could have lived, all the men she could have married, she couldn't imagine being happier than he had made her. 65 years down, she smiled, and many more to go. "You are the love of my life," he murmured, dropping a sweet kiss to her lips. "And you are mine." It was a warm autumn day when Hermione apparated to the front gates of Malfoy Manor, met by Lucius and Abraxas Malfoy, who was waiting for her as they have every year for the last 5. "Good morning, Hermione,"
Abraxas welcomed jovially. He looked exactly as he had in a portrait that she had seen of him once in Malfoy Manor when she was just a girl. "Morning, dear. How's Draco doing at school?" Hermione asked.
Lucius wrinkled his nose. "He loves it. Is attentive in class, is doing very well in the rankings. However, he seems to be infatuated with the Gryffindor girl."
"Oh."
"Her name is Hermione too,"
Abraxas said in a tone that seemed to be insinuating something. She ignored him. "This is lovely," Hermione said. Lucius held out his arm and helped Hermione wrap her arm around it.
"She is a Muggle-born," Hermione sighed. "You know, Lucius, there are worse things in the world than one's birth. I seem to remember your mother wondering if you were a squib. It took so long for you to manifest. And look how you turned out, bright, powerful, and loving."
"Oh, Merlin!" Lucius looked utterly betrayed. There weren't many people who knew about it, but Adelaide had come to her when Lucius turned 10 and still hadn't presented. Most people knew she had a knack for complicated magic. But there wasn't anything she could do for the family except tell Adelaide that she was 100% positive that Lucius was a wizard. Hermione's word had been enough to stop the worrying, and a year later, weeks before his Hogwarts letter would come, he finally blasted out 6 windows in the Longbottom greenhouses by accident. No one was happier to make the repast than Adelaide. "Anyway, he won't marry young Hermione, dear," Hermione assured him.
"How do you know?"
He looked away and rolled his eyes. Abraxas on the other side looked curious. All talking stopped for a moment while the trio climbed a hill, a lone tree pulsating at the top with magic. Once she was only a few steps away, she let go of Lucius and walked a distance alone. She closed her eyes tightly and caressed the tree, feeling the familiar pull of magic that had once melded her with its magic. Though muted, it was still there, dormant and waiting for the day it would melt with its host.
"It never flowers or produces fruit. I don't know what you like about it so much," Lucius grumbled.
"This is not just any tree, Lucius. This tree is only one of 2 in the whole entire world, and I'm the one who planted it here. It is not mature yet, but it will be soon. You asked me how I knew that Draco wouldn't marry Hermione Granger, and this is my answer. I am a time traveler, and this tree is the mote in which brought me here. Your son, Draco, and I made a pact with this being. The truth is that Draco will marry Ginny Weasley, and their daughter will become the first Smurg of this tree. I have seen it, and every year I come to visit, and I let it know that I was able to do what I set out to do, that I am grateful for the opportunity, that I am sorry to the Malfoy girls who will become a Smurg. As long as I live, I will protect the tree and the Malfoy family from ruin."
"But you have only been coming the last 5, Abraxas said.
"No, you have only accompanied me the last 5. I've come on my own without Malfoy knowledge for the last 65 years, she said. Then she mumbled, as if in an afterthought, to Abraxas, "I can't stand your rat bastard of a father."
"How did you get past the wards?"
"Easy. I'm a Malfoy too."
"This is what you choose to ask? Out of all the information she just gave us?"
Lucius stared incredulously at his father. Abraxas shrugged.
"Tom Dumbledore confided in me most of this information. I'm not surprised."
"Tom talked to you about this?" Hermione asked in astonishment.
"After he graduated from Hogwarts, you brought him here, a pensieve in hand, and told him everything. You have no idea how much that knowledge affected him, and since we are good mates—"
Hermione nodded. She had wondered if he had talked to anyone about the memories that he saw in the pensieve, and now she knew that he did, and she was glad. It would have horrified anyone to see that future could have been theirs.
"You knew about this?"
Lucius said, clearly unable to cope. "What would you like to know, Lucius?" Hermione asked, still stroking the tree trunk.
"First of all, if you are a time traveler and you knew Draco, are you the Hermione Granger he has been talking about in school?"
"Yes."
But you were a Slytherin before you married Grindelwald, and how the hell are the Malfoys' wards keyed to you? I was a born as Hermione Granger. After the Blood Wars, there was just Draco and I left. Everyone else, including you, had died. That was not a world I wanted to live in. Because of the inheritance from my best friend Harry Potter, and Draco also gifting me the bridal vault, I was wealthy enough to convince the goblins to release a vault I could access in another time. But to claim it, I had to be adopted by the name. The name was Slytherin. To protect me in the past, Draco adopted me because of the protections on the Malfoy name. That is why young Hermione, who is still in Hogwarts, cannot marry Draco. They are magically siblings, and she would be able to walk through your blood wards without invitation, just as I've done in the past. Hermione said as she began stroking the leaves. Abraxas was nodding along, as if this was just a recap for him, but Lucius looked upset. He will be crushed. I'm pretty sure he loves her. Already? Hermione snickered, thinking it more likely that Draco would like to have a go at her. Feelings, if there were any, would have grown over several years. Not in a matter of weeks. What was Lucius reading these days? Love at first sight romance novels. She could barely contain her laugh as she imagined a proud and slightly pompous Lucius Malfoy reading the naughty bits with a huge prudish blush. You need to discourage this, obviously. Discouragement will not be enough, he insisted. And why don't you pay a visit to her parents and tell them she has been adopted into your family and that she and they are welcome at the manor anytime for any reasons? Then tell the young ones. This way they can grow their friendship without the thought of anything more. Do it now while they are still reasonably young. This is a wonderful idea, Abraxas said. I always wanted a granddaughter, and what better granddaughter would there be than the great Hermione Grindelwald herself? Lucius rolled his eyes. So, Sissy and I are supposed to do what? Treat her like our daughter? If you are comfortable with that, she said. It wasn't a bad idea, but it would have to be their decision. Perhaps she should take young Hermione aside and do for her what she had done for Tom. Then again, she didn't want to burden the young girl. Hermione Granger should have a normal childhood. She doubted Lucius wouldn't act on the information she had given him anyway. In fact, she would eat her want if Lucius didn't write her son straight away after returning to the manor. Malfoy in Gryffindor. Preposterous! He made a choking sound before turning and fairly fleeing the mound, leaving Hermione and Abraxas alone chuckling. He will calm down in time, Hermione said. They always do. He is probably disappointed now that he knows Hermione Granger is you and that she can't actually marry Draco, Abraxas said, hands clasped behind his back. After all, I would be. Pish-posh, she said, sniffing the leaves. Hermione took a small dagger out of her beaded bag and pierced the skin of her finger, rubbing the life-giving liquid on the bark the same way she had done in order to time travel. She didn't know if it made a difference, but what if it did? Either way, she was grateful and remorseful. Once her blood was spread out on the tree that would one day become an end, she bowed her head and tried to communicate all the positive things that had happened because of her journey. First and foremost was Lily and James Potter and their 2 children, Harry and Genevieve, that lived in the Potter cottage of Godric's Hollow. James was still in Oran this time, though his speciality was event planning. He was the one responsible for the security that surrounded Quidditch matches, concert halls, and anything else that called for a large magical population to gather. Lily stayed home for the children, but once Genevieve went off to Hogwarts, she fully intended on joining Hermione in the museum. Sirius and Regulus both ended up in Gryffindor this time around. Sirius was still single and planned on playing the field until he dropped dead, she supposed, which suited the now middle-aged Aura. Regulus, on the other hand, had married Marianne Lovegood, Xenophilius' sister, a sister that he hadn't had in Hermione's time, and had 3 boys, 2 of which were still at Hogwarts. Remus Lupin was never bitten by Fenrir as a child. That had truly shocked her. Instead, he became a healer at St. Mango's. The wave of reforms that Hermione helped put in place when she first joined the Wizengamot enabled a more informed public. As a result, Fenrir didn't have that deep hatred and resentment of wizard kind. Though he was a werewolf, he worked on a conservatorship in Russia, assisting the potion master with the continued development of the Wolfsbane potion. Peter never betrayed his friends and went on to become one of the Ministers of Magic's junior assistants. He was often seen with his mates, James, Sirius, and Remus. Some friendships were just meant to be. As a result of the Death Eaters never being created, the very small fraction of blood purists left were fading away in the onslaught of Hermione's reforms. The only ones who still fought against her in the Wizengamot were the older generation. The benefits of equality far outweighed the need for purism, and it wasn't so hard on their pockets either. Severus Snape was another surprise. Without the horrendous hate between the houses, Snape enjoyed a continuing friendship with Lily Potter.
In the First War, he had reached the level of Potions Master by receiving a sponsorship from Voldemort. This time around, Hermione was a sponsor. The moment Snape showed an interest in becoming a Potions Master, she was quick to offer scholarship. He was one of the very few to have a sponsorship after only completing his hours, and she assumed it helped him feel accepted. He was as gifted as he was in the past, but this time he was not a professor at Hogwarts, nor did he have any desire to become one. She fully supported that. Hermione was pulled out of her silent recount by Brux's light cough.
I do have one question, though, he said. What is a Smurg?
The end.
Thank you for listening to this chapter of The Smurg by Jessiy, read by Ella Max Mabella. If you would like to stay up to date on upcoming chapters and stories, you can follow me on YouTube, Spotify, AO3, Instagram, or Tumblr.